Understanding quality of service. I remember teaching the original quality of service series back at CBT Nuggets. This must have been 8, 10 maybe years ago when Cisco had the CCVP certification, voice professional. That's gone away. It's now called the CCNP voice. And this was back in an era where CBT Nuggets were 60 minutes each. You'd get about 20, 30 of them per series. And I remember putting the quality of service series together, and I'm like 5 nuggets in, and I'm going, well, that's about it, And they're like, no, 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 you got a minimum requirement, you got to. And so I'm like, well, let me tell you another story about my childhood and how that relates to quality. I mean, there wasn't much to it. And so here I am standing now talking about the collaboration series, and I think I can encompass the core of what you need to know in a single maybe 10-15 minute nugget called quality of service. So here's what you're up against. So you've got these data networks. And what are networks really? I mean, when I first describe networks to new people, I always use roads. You've got to have a road infrastructure to get around to the houses and stores and all that exists. Well, what does quality of service do? Well, it says not all traffic on that road is created equal. You've got emergency vehicles that have to get to a destination because it's life or death. You've got Jeremy who has to get to the office, and you all know that's a high priority compared to someone else who, maybe they're just going to Circle K or something like that. So you've got these different priorities on the road. You got to have methods to make sure that the traffic gets there well, in the same way in your data networks, right? You've got all kinds of people surfing the web and twittering and Facebooking and watching YouTube videos. I mean, we live in a world of distraction. I could talk a lot about that, but I'm not going to, because all that distracted network traffic is low priority. You've got people running databases. You've got replication happens. You've got backups that are running. You've got voice over IP and video IP. That video over an IP network. That's what we're here to talk about, which are your priorities. And so that's what quality of service is here to do. It gives you the opportunity to choose your most important traffic. So let's first off talk about the evil villains. Essentially, we know bandwidth is not unlimited, right? You have limits on your different links, and it typically hits you not in the core of your network. You got your switches with all the traffic and all the different stuff going on, but it hits you at the edge of your network, where you've got the router connecting to we'll say MPLS or the WAN or whatever kind of network, or maybe it's the internet. Essentially, that's typically where your constraint comes in. Now, it's not like the networks of yesteryear. I mean, back 10 years ago, when I'm teaching quality of service, people were like, T1 lines, modem, dial-up. I mean, we weren't quite that old, but I mean, it was not today's world where I'm driving down and seeing billboards saying, "Do you want gigabit internet to your home? Sign up now." I'm like, come on. So the bandwidth has increased immensely, but I will say, especially in business networks, that can be a costly thing. Now, let me make one thing clear, and you're gonna hear a lot of different opinions about this, but I can tell you, after doing this in the world for years and years and years and years, if you've got unlimited bandwidth, you don't have to worry about quality of service. Essentially, all the quality of service methods kick in when you run into congestion. So if you've got 10 gig links and you're monitoring and they're at, a percent utilization 24 hours a day, you don't need quality of service. And what you might say, well, Jeremy, who would disagree with that? A lot of people will say, well, yeah, but there's those temporary moments of congestion, that don't show up on a bandwidth monitoring graph, where all of a sudden something hits Yes, I will absolutely say there's exceptions to every rule, but I have seen a lot of networks run and run well without a single bit of quality of service, do voice, do video, because they've got buku bandwidth everywhere, right? So quality of service is needed when there is a bandwidth issue, but let's first off address the issue right on. If you have a severe lack of bandwidth, you are going to be fighting an unwinnable war if you are trying to solve everything with quality of service. I mean, if you've got a T1 line, as your WAN link, and you're trying to send video across that's taking a megabit per second, you've got 2 megs of other traffic that you're trying to get through there as well. I always say it's kind of like rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. Your ship is sinking, it's going down. Sure, you may, with quality of service, save the day for your video stream, but the rest of your network falls apart. People's data connections fail. I can't download the web page. I can't replicate the traffic. Whatever the case is. If you have a severe lack of bandwidth and you add voice and video, don't expect quality of service to save the day. Yes, your voice, your video may survive, but you know what? There's a whole lot more to the rest of your network than just voice and video. So here's the ones that we can impact with quality of service: delay, jitter, and packet loss. So delay. Delay is how long it takes traffic to get from point A. Let's say you've got a phone or a telepresence screen or something over on this network. How long does it take the video or the voice to get from that side of the network all the way to its destination, right? Usually when we talk about delays, we're talking a one-way thing, because essentially you can get that conversation there. If that goes too long, which typically if you start going overseas through satellite connections, it can become a very real challenge. If that delay goes too long, you start getting the effect like you see on the evening news when you're talking to a reporter who's on a battle scene in some country, and they're like, "Come on, Joe, tell us how it really is over there." And you see Joe staring blankly at the screen for 2 or 3 seconds. And then he's like, "Oh, it's crazy over here. There's, and he kind of expands." And they actually use a lot of editing. They cut Joe off because at the end, because they know they don't want, their audience sitting there watching Joe staring blankly, waiting for some kind of response. So they timed everything well, but you don't want that kind of thing when you're having a video telepresence session or a phone call. Matter of fact, I can tell you, I deal with a lot of people overseas on tech support, and it is a challenge, even if there's a slight delay. Sometimes you have a language barrier, but at the same time, you also run into a case where you're saying, "Okay, yeah, my router's crashing." And you're waiting, you go, did you hear that? But at the same time, they hear that and they start responding from overseas. They're like, "Oh, okay, well, here's what you need." And so you start overlapping. It becomes unnatural. It becomes frustrating. And before long, you're like, "I can't handle this anymore." And people go crazy. So delay causes craziness. What's our goal? Our goal for voice and video, our ideal world, is to have less than 150 millisecond delay from point A to point B. Here is a rough way to calculate. Go to a command prompt and ping whatever destination you're going after. Now, when you do a ping, first off, this is a round-trip delay. This is, by the way, a server in California, maybe 500 miles away. 500? Maybe 300 miles away for me right now. And so I'm getting a round-trip delay of 30 milliseconds. Divide that out, and I've got a 15 millisecond delay. Now, does that mean I've solved the world's problems if I can ping something and it's less than 150? Not necessarily, because a ping packet is very small. So you may want to increase, for instance, you just do like a little, what's the -L, I think, is the size? 1500. So I'm going to throw a 1500 byte packet, and you can That made a difference. You can see I added a millisecond to the average delay, but essentially that you need to make sure that you're simulating the real traffic. Also, when you're doing a ping, you may not have the quality of service market. Oh man, I don't know if I'm going to be able to fit this all in one day. There's so much to say. I thought I could do it, but I'm going to keep talking. Let's go from there. So our delay is one thing that we can affect with quality of service measures. Jitter is delay variation. See, when you're having a phone conversation to another location far away, you want to have smooth playout. Essentially, at the end of the road, even incorporated into the phone, is something called a de-jitter buffer. What that is, it's like you remember the old. I'm at an age where so this just happened to me. I turned on my Wii, my Nintendo Wii, and I'm like, okay, I'm gonna go update it. I haven't played this for a little while with my kids, so I go to the update, and they're like, I'm sorry, your Wii is no longer supported. You need to go upgrade. You can't get any online services anymore for this product. It's too old. And I'm looking at it. I'm like, I remember standing in line at night when this thing came out to get one of these things. What do you mean it's too old? This is what, like a year old? So time is, it's going fast. Well, so CD players, right? So remember portable CD players? If you're too young, they're the discs before there were iPods that you would put into these mechanical things that would spin the disc and read it with a laser. That sounds a little more modern, right? Well, they had portable ones, and you would walk around, and if you bumped the thing, it was like doop doop. Yeah, I tried to mow the lawn with a portable CD player. It didn't work, and so all of a sudden Sony. I just remember Sony was the first one to come out with a CD player with ESP, an enhanced skip protection. And what it was is a read ahead. So you would hit the play button on your CD. It would take a little bit to start because it was actually reading ahead of where you were, so you could bump it, bruise it, drop it, and all that for 30 seconds or so, and your song wouldn't skip because it was reading ahead, right? Well, that same mechanism is inside of the phones. It's inside of the voice gateways all the way out because they realize, you're saying, hello, my name is Jeremy, and it actually chops those up into little packets containing 20 milliseconds of audio. I mean, think about that. I say hello. It takes about a second to get there. That's like 50 packets, that it chops that up. So it's containing all these little small pieces of voice that are traveling hundreds, thousands of miles to reach this phone. Well, there may be a little delay. Maybe packet 1 takes, 31 milliseconds, like we saw in my ping, to get there. Well, that was wrong round trip, but you get the idea. Maybe packet 2 takes 31, packet 3 takes 35, packet 4 takes 40 milliseconds to get there because there was a little and then back down to 30. Well, that's called jitter, delay variation. Where you've got these little gaps between these packets. You can't have that. And then so inside of here, they've got a small, it's dynamic. It kind of adjusts based on the quality of the phone call. Read ahead, if you will, that actually adds overall delay. So you can't make it very big at all. I mean, it's not like my old Sony CD player that's reading ahead like 30 seconds. I mean, we're talking like milliseconds, like 50, 100 milliseconds or so, that it's trying to read ahead in there to get some smooth playouts. And so if your jitter gets too far, even though you may have, packet 1 that takes 31 milliseconds, packet 2 maybe takes 100 milliseconds to get there, right? You're like, well, I'm under the 150, but you've got 70 milliseconds of jitter inside of there. That's not going to be smooth playout. So what's probably going to happen is this guy ends up getting dropped because it gets there. It's like, oh, sorry, you're outside my buffer. I've got to drop you. That's where you start getting. I mean, that's That's one of the biggest ones. Delay, overall delay, may not be as big of a challenge as jitter is to keep it consistent. That's what quality of service specialty is keeping it consistent. Of course, the last one is loss. And delay and jitter both result in loss. Loss can happen because there's a bad connection, but most of the time with voice and video, it's happening because you've got a poor quality of connection and the delay and jitter is too bad. And so it goes outside of these buffers and it just says, you know what, you are too late to the game, packet, you are gone. Now, there are all kinds of mechanisms built in. Like when you see 20 milliseconds of audio, I mean, what do you think that sounds like? Beep, beep. I don't even think I can emulate it. It's such a tiny piece of audio. So one of the things they have is kind of like concealment mechanisms. You know, I think of makeup, you know, concealing the flaws. So you've got, you know, all of these little packets that are coming across. It's like, you know, bam, this one drops. Well, on the fly, the devices can actually extend the audio of packet 1 and packet 2 and bridge them together because you figure 20 milliseconds, you're all right to do that. But if, let's say, you drop this and this and this and this and this, well, the concealment mechanism still kicks in and you get this long little delay. You know what you sound like? And some of you, I know some of you have heard this before when you're talking on like a bad cell phone call. You sound like a robot, where the other person, they're like, yeah, I can't. I'm not an impressionist, but you get the point because it's extending sounds too long and people start sounding mechanical, and that's not good either, right? So those are our evil villains. Now let me see how fast I can talk about how we solve the problem. The first thing you've got to know is what you're aiming for, your traffic requirements. I mean, if you're talking audio, look at that, my pen got really fat suddenly. If you're talking audio, typically you're talking about requirements of like 64 kilobits per second, 100 kilobits per second, 20 kilobits per second. I mean, you can get really slim but good sounding audio conversations. But video, ooh, it's kind of a moving target because video, the way it's designed with digital video is it's essentially sending pictures of a person or an event or whatever you're watching with the video, a whole bunch of them really fast. But they've optimized video to only send what's changing. If you ever watch, you know, a video on YouTube closely, you'll see the fringe areas, like the corners of the video, start looking like they're kind of frozen, because they are. Essentially, let's just say that you're watching a person talk about the profound mystery of grass, and he's kind of standing there in the middle, and all around him is pictures of grass. Well, as long as the grass isn't waving in the wind or something like that, it just kind of freezes. So your bandwidth requirements are really based on movement inside of there. So if you are talking about limited movement, let me give you a formula, right? So if you're talking about limited movement, you can take the resolution of your video, so width times height, right, divided by 600, and that will give you approximately, because it is a moving target, approximately in kilobits per second how much your video stream is going to take. So let's just take, for instance, like 720p video, 720 progressive scan is typically 1280 by 720. If I do that and divide it by 600, and pull up my calculator, 1280 times 720 equal, then divided by 600, bam, 1536. Wow, it's a familiar amount. That's about a T1 line, 1.5 megabits per second of bandwidth to do a limited movement. Now we're talking limited, like I'm talking, you know, a green screen, somebody standing up there. like me doing a lecture about grass or something like that. Now, I will say that will change. That's why I'm saying it's a moving target. Like right now, I'm talking to you, I'm pacing around, I'm waving my hands in the air, I'm excited about video. Like I'm not a normal static talk about grass kind of presenter. So for my video, it might go a little beyond what's typically expected. That's why you always want to put a little buffer inside of there. Let me give you a good comparison to a really live video. So like think about a sporting event, right? Where you've got a basketball games, cameras constantly panning the whole field, or a tennis match, multiple camera angles put together. If you have that kind of event, you want to change the formula to width times height, but you divide it by 180 instead of 600. So again, we've got the same 720p, right? If you divide that by 180, up there, what is it? 1280 by 720 divided by 180, you're at 5.1 megabits per second, or 5120 kilobits per second of bandwidth you can use. So I mean, you can tell, man, that's huge. So when you're thinking about video, always get that perspective. The guy standing there not moving except his lips talking about grass, he might be that 1.4 megabits per second for 720p video, whereas someone like me kind of dancing around, waving his hands in the air, might be somewhere in between, and then the live sporting event is the 5 megabits per second. So again, gut feel gauge. Now let me talk about Jabber, right? Cisco's all about their Jabber client. They've put some averages together, and I'll just give them straight out. If you got 1080p, that'd be 1080p, I mean high def HD progressive video, 1920 by 1080 resolution, they will tell you should expect, I should say, about 2.6 megabits per second of bandwidth. If you've got 720p, again, Jabber client. When you think Jabber, you're talking, somebody sitting on their laptop having a video call with somebody else in your enterprise. 1.2 megabits per second. Seeing values like this, that's 720p, right? Seeing values like this makes me glad we are coming into a world where I'm seeing signs and billboards on the freeway. Do you want gigabit to your home? And it's not going to be long before you start seeing that worldwide. 360p. So again, small little video, about 640 by 360. Very old laptop displays had that resolution. About 0.44, 440 kilobits per second, or 0.44 megabits per second of bandwidth. That's understanding your traffic requirements. So you've got this traffic, right? You know what you're shooting for. It's coming into your device. What do you do with it? Well, you've got to separate it from everything else. That's the idea of classification and marking. I drew the image beforehand. I'm going to get off of red because that usually means something's wrong. So I've got my router here connected to a WAN link, right? Some other router, other sites, all that kind of stuff. And inside of here is my LAN, where I've got my telepresence display screen. I've got my IP phones. I've got my users with their iPods and iPads wirelessly connected, surfing the web. I've got servers doing backups and replication, all this kind of stuff. There's all kinds of different traffic on my network, and it's all coming through this router, either going off to the internet or going off to the cloud, a data center, going off to some other location. And this guy right here has to have the ability to tell the difference between them. So how do you do that? Well, all kinds of ways. You can use an access list on that device to say, okay, if it's coming from these IP addresses, which means having a great internal design of different VLANs, saying, okay, your telepresence machines, your voice over IP devices, your IP phones, they're going to be on different VLANs and have different subnets. Makes it really easy when you get right here to match them. To say, okay, well, you know what? If it comes from 10.3.2 subnet, it's voice, because that's where I put all the IP phones. Otherwise, you have to start doing things like, okay, it came on these port numbers, or, you know, for instance, IP phones, telepresence. You can configure it to mark the packets. Marking, it comes in two ways. You have class of service. That's a layer 2 marking that switches typically see. And type of service, or more modern method, is called DSCP, and that is a layer 3 thing that typically routers will deal with. Well, a lot of these devices you can configure as you are sending packets to mark it with a type of service of, and by the way, these are values you do want to know. IP phones, or voice over IP, should be a type of service of 5, whereas video will typically have a type of service of 4. Why? Because video is not as valuable as voice. You can watch the video get a little jittery and break up, but as long as you can understand what they're saying, it's a mere distraction. Whereas if you flip that story, obviously it doesn't work out well. So marking is good. Why? Because I now have that traffic tagged the whole way through the network. I don't have to keep matching that subnet all over again, or keep matching certain port numbers. I can say it's coming on ToS value 4. So all the way through the network, I gear my quality of service just to match that value 4. I don't care where it came from. If it's got that marking, it's going to get quality of service, right? That's the whole idea, is just separating the traffic. Now you come down to queuing. Queuing is the most famous quality of service type that exists. It is the one that can say, okay, you go first, you go second, you go third. You are going to drop because I don't have enough bandwidth to send you. Essentially, we've gone through many different types of queuing methods over history. I'll give you 3 of the big ones. Priority queuing says, okay, if I've got traffic tagged or marked as ToS 4 and traffic marked as ToS 3, then 4 will always go. I don't care if 3 dies at the router. If there's enough 4 to use up the bandwidth, 4 will always go. That's strict priority queuing. Now, great thing about priority queuing is you know your 4 traffic is going to make it, because it's got the priority all the time, unless you have enough 4 traffic to exceed the overall amount of bandwidth that you have on the link. That's, by the way, where another mechanism, it's not quality of service, it's called call admission control, or CAC. That's where that has to get involved. It's beyond quality of service. We'll talk about that actually in the next nugget. But if you have ToS 4, you know it's going to get there. That's the beauty of priority, but it can starve the rest of your network, right? Because it can eat up all the bandwidth, nothing else gets through. So the alternative to that would be class-based queuing. So class-based queuing says I'm going to carve out certain bandwidth amounts, like, okay, 30% of my bandwidth maybe goes to ToS 4, and then 20% goes to ToS 3. I did these wrong. Let's just say 50% goes to ToS 5. Now, you don't usually carve out all of your bandwidth like I just did. You want to leave some left over for some of the others. So what it's going to do when you set up your classes, it's going to say, okay, voice or ToS 5, you're going to get your 50%. Here you go. Okay, you're done. Let's now flip down to 4. Here's your 30%. Here you go. Okay, now we're down to ToS 3. Here you go. So class-based queuing is awesome because kind of, it gives some, it's like a handicap, right? It's like, okay, we'll give you some extra brownie points, ToS 5 over ToS 4 over ToS 3, but no one's starving the whole network. But the problem is when you got delay sensitive traffic, you got delay sensitive traffic. It's got to go. You got a voice back in there. You got to go. You can't wait for the database traffic because it is delay sensitive, whereas the database traffic is like, 50 milliseconds, 500 milliseconds, 1,000 milliseconds. I don't care. I'm a database field. As long as I get from my database here to the database over there, I'm good. It doesn't care about delay like voice and video does. So the problem with class-based queuing is once it leaves your queue to go service these other queues, you have packets sitting there gaining delay. Your quality is dropping. Last type of legacy queuing is weighted fair queuing, WFQ. Weighted fair queuing, not a good one for voice and video at all. All it does is say, you know what, if you send a lot of stuff, I'm going to put you at a lower priority over the traffic that just sends a little stuff, right? So like a telnet session would totally get priority over a voice session or video session or a web browsing session or something like that, because it's such a little amount of bandwidth. Well, video can send a lot and you don't want it penalized because of that. So weighted fair queuing just isn't good. And that's where they have actually bled all of these things into one monster queuing method of today, and that is known as low latency queuing. What it does is combine all three methods into one. It gives you a single strict priority queue. What do I mean by strict? I mean that when you say that priority queue gets 10% of the bandwidth, or gets 100 kilobits per second, or 5 megabits per second, whatever you set as the bandwidth value, let's just say 5 megabits per second, it will get 5 megabits per second of bandwidth, but that's it. As soon as it hits the 5 megabit per second, it is cut off. So you're saying, so you mean you got like a gigabit link, right? Nothing else is using it. You turn on low latency queuing and set it to 5 megabits per second. You're never going to get more than 5. That's exactly what I'm saying. You're saying, but there's 995 megabits per second of bandwidth sitting there waiting to be used, and you're saying LLQ will actually cut it off. That's exactly what I'm saying. Because you had to come against the big problem of priority queuing, which is starvation of everything else. So when you set that upper limit, the beauty of it is you know exactly what it is, and you engineer your whole network based on that. You know, if you're introducing a telepresence room with 3 screens that's going to eat up 4 megabits per second steady bandwidth, okay, whoa, we've got to adjust that queue up to 10, because otherwise we're not going to have enough priority queue left to service that. Make sense? Below the priority queue, you have your class-based queues, and that's where you say, well, the database traffic, it's got to have at least 20%, in a worst-case scenario. Now, again, can I remind you, queuing does not kick in unless there is congestion outside of the strict priority, right? So if you've got 1,000 megabits per second of bandwidth and you're never hitting it, the only thing that it's doing is a type of policing. That's what the strict priority is cutting off your top priority queue. It's not really doing anything else. But in a case of congestion, then your database gets your 20%, your all different values. At the very bottom of the low latency queuing is weighted fair queuing. And that is the one that essentially says, okay, if you haven't been specified, all the other stuff going on the network, like web surfing, FTP file transfer, everything else just kind of goes into the weighted fair queue, where the low bandwidth senders get priority over the high bandwidth senders. That's the core of quality of service. But let me hit this last one, shaping and policing. I already talked a little bit about policing. Policing is the only anti quality of service method that you have, where you get to say, okay, that is capped at blah. When you get into advanced classification, you can really get granular. You can get, okay, YouTube streams, your peer-to-peer file sharing. I'm just throwing out like, junk or evil traffic, and you can actually police that down. I'm thinking about like a college campus where they provide internet access to the dorm rooms, and people are doing all kinds of crazy stuff in there. You can police that down so it doesn't jeopardize the rest of the network, and it cuts off as soon as it hits the limit. Shaping is exactly the same as policing, but it's a kinder, gentler. It's like, I want to try and send you, and I'm going to do my best. Like, I'm going to kind of do what that CD player did and kind of cue you up to get out there. I'm trying to send you, but there's not enough bandwidth right now. I use this all the time because we've come into a world where internet connections and WAN links are now all coming in on Ethernet. Used to be where you have serial links and stuff like that, where on the serial links, like physically, it wouldn't be able to send more than a T1 line or 3 megabits per second or whatever the serial cap was. And so it just automatically, figured out how much bandwidth it was, and all the queuing methods would go around that. Well, when you've got a router with a gigabit per second Ethernet link, and you plug that into a connection that comes in on Ethernet, it doesn't know it's not a gigabit. I mean, maybe you're only paying that ISP for 50 megabits per second, right? Well, it doesn't know that's what you're paying for, so shaping says, whoa, 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 whoa. You may have a gigabit per second physical link, but I want to shape this traffic down to 50 megabits per second. Now, I know some of you might be saying, well, why would you do that? Because, I mean, don't you maybe the service router might give you a little more. Maybe they'll let you burst or something above that, right? Well, so why would you throttle it down? Well, because if you don't, then it doesn't know when there's congestion happening, and queuing never really kicks in because it never has a reason to. It never feels like it's bottlenecked, so all the traffic goes as fast as it possibly can send, and it gets to the service provider, and you know who decides what gets dropped? Not you. They do. So you send 60 megabits per second of traffic on a 50 meg per second circuit, they're going to drop 10. Or maybe they let you burst, and so they only drop 9, right? But they're not going to be selective in what they drop. They're just kind of like, you know what? FIFO, first in, first out. Whatever gets here first, we'll take it. And once you hit your 50 megabits per second, we're dropping whatever left over. So that's going to include your video and your voice traffic. That is quality of service in 20 minutes or so. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.